بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين عليه من ربه أفضل الصلاة والتسليم أما بعد. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us to come here over the course of the last few days, the days of Tashriq and the days subsequent to it, to read from a monumental masterpiece from the writings of the great Imam, Shaykh al-Islam, Ibn Qayyim al Jawziyyah rahimahullah ta'ala. And in this book, as we have heard, for those who have been attending, or for those who perhaps will hear my words and go back to what they haven't read of the book, if they haven't read the book, or if they haven't read the book in detail, which most of you probably haven't, because as you see, what is in front of you is 300 pages, and there's no way to cover that in the detail that is required in the limited amount of time that we have. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he in this book mentions the reality of the life of the heart, the reality of the life of the heart, and the conflict that happens within a person between the iman in his heart that makes his heart alive and his nafs that is insisting upon and ordering with evil, and the conflict that is happening in his heart between al-malak wa shaitan, between one's angel that is assigned to them and the shaitan that is assigned to them, that is with them throughout the duration of their life. And this war within is what we want to talk about for this sitting, in as much as I wasn't scheduled to speak at this slot or at this time, and I had expected to be traveling. And so I'm not going to be reading from the book Ighathat al-Lahfan, but I'm going to be reading from the works of Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala. In one or two places I will read a section from Ighathat al-Lahfan inshallah ta'ala, and about this war within. And we'll preface the war within by recapping some of what has been mentioned up until this point. And this is a good place to have this talk in this book, because we are moving into the 11th, 12th, and 13th chapter, which are about the heart being sickened by the nafs, by the self of the person, and the self of the person insisting upon evil, and how this empowers the shaitan, which is the next chapter, the 12th chapter, and then the 13th chapter is about the maka'id and masa'id of shaitan, the plans and the traps of the shaitan. And so everything leading up to this point has been, for the most part, talking about the heart, and how when the heart is healthy, it carries out its proper function and has the proper results and the intended outcomes, which is happiness and joy and bliss and contentment in this world and the next, that are the thamarat of iman, that are the fruits of faith. And so Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he speaks in some detail about the two functions of the heart. And he even wrote entire books, you could say to a degree, about these functions of the hearts. Who here knows and remembers from what we have studied so far from the book, لِلْقَلْبِ قُوَّتَانِ, that there are two functions. When we look at the Quran and the Sunnah, then we see that there are two main functions of the heart. What are they? That's the same thing, but that's one of them. He said al-hubb wal-irada, love and intention, but that's the same thing. Love and intention is the same thing. Al-ilm wal-irada, al-ilm wal-irada. Al-ilm, which is called al-idrak, or called al-tasawwur, or called husn al-fahm, and there's different ways, or it's called yaqeen. It's called different things according to the context, but they all are pointing towards the same concept. knowledge, perception, good understanding, all of that, right? That a person has a good understanding of their religion. And the second is that they have a good intention, that they have their priorities together, which is a result of knowledge, because knowledge is to know what is beneficial and what is harmful, and the source of benefit and the cause of harm, and the one who controls benefit and harm, who is Allah, Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and the means to achieve the good and to be spared from the harm. This is the whole religion, to know Allah and to know what Allah loves, Tabarak wa Ta'ala. And so once they know Allah and what Allah loves, and they love Allah and what Allah loves, and hate what Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala hates. And this is the core function of the heart. As we heard in the last sitting, a very, very, very important chapter about the signs of the healthy heart and the sick heart, and the importance of being patient in remedying one's self and the sicknesses of their heart. And the functions of the heart that we just mentioned, al-ilm, wal-irada, of love, or of knowledge of the truth, and wanting what is loved by Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, that one of the clearest indications of the sickness of the heart is that a person لا تؤلمه جراحات القبائح, is that a person is no longer pained by the wounds inflicted by hideous behavior, whether it is done by themselves or by somebody else. That a person, that they no longer have inkar of munkar in their heart. They no longer hate evil in their heart. And this is something that we are very vulnerable to, and that we are at high risk of in living in the time that we live, in the place that we live, of becoming desensitized to evil and filth of every sort, and of things on a great caliber of evil that people become desensitized to, and Allah's refuge is sought. And so Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, in the subsequent chapters, he talks about the conflict between the heart and the nafs, and how all of the sicknesses of the heart are caused by the self. That they are caused by the self, and the stronger the self is, and the more it is left unchecked, and the less muhasabah a person does, the less accounting a person does of their self, the more authority the shaitan will have over them. The more authority shaitan will have over them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me to teach this book over the course of 2 years at Masjid al-Rahmah in Newark, New Jersey. Allah bless those brothers and their community. And alhamdulillah, this book has a very high place with me and a very high status in my heart. And this chapter that is going to be taught by Sheikh Ahmed, and the next sitting, inshallah ta'ala, I taught over the course of an entire weekend at Masjid al-Furqan in Toronto, Canada. And alhamdulillah, that next chapter about muhasabatun nafs, it is like a distillation and a synthesis of the book of Al-Imam Abu Bakr Ibn Abi Dunya rahimahullah ta'ala. It's called Muhasabatun Nafs. It collects what is in the Sunnah and the statements of the Sahaba and the early Salaf about reckoning with the self, checking the self, rebuking the self, disciplining the self, punishing the self by forcing it to do what it doesn't want to do, and all these sorts of concepts. And it is very important. And so as a segue between what we already heard and what we're going to get to, inshallah ta'ala, over the course of the rest of this evening, we want to read some of the words of Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala about this war within, between the iman in a person's heart and his nafs that is ordering with evil, and the shaitan. And Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says in his book Al-Fawaid, he said, ألقى الله سبحانه وتعالى العداوة بين الشيطان وبين الملك. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has placed enmity. He has placed enmity between one's shaitan and their angel. Between one's shaitan and their angels. Comes in the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, collected by Imam Muslim in Sahih, ما منكم من أحد إلا وكل به قرينه من الجن وقرينه من الملائكة. That there is not a single one of you except he has appointed to you a qareen, a companion from the jinn, and a companion, somebody meaning that is something that is mulazim to him, that is always with him, from the malaika, from the angels. Throughout the duration of a person's life, they have these two inner forces, these two things that are working on their heart and that are fighting for his heart, The imdad The imdad, as Ibn Qayyim mentions here and in many other places in his writings, the imdad, yani the supply of the angel that is necessary, the weaponry that is needed for the angel to win the war is iman. And the supply of the shaitan is al-hawa, is the desires of a person, the hawa of their nafs, the desires of their nafs, of their inner self. And the more a person strengthens their iman and works on the core of their iman and builds up their iman, seeking the assistance of Allah and the help of Allah in doing so, the more the angel will have authority and will have its lemma, its touch, and descend upon the heart of the person, encourage the person and inspire them with all good. And the more the shaitan is left to roam and left to prowl and prey upon the heart of a person, and the more a person is upon their desires, does not check their self, the more the shaitan will aftarasa, and the more shaitan will make them his prey. The more the shaitan will prey upon their heart and hunt and use everything. Because once the heart is sick and once the heart is dead, and the heart is the king, what are the troops of the king? The eyes, the hearing, the hands, the feet, etc. And the rest of the body of the person, and his heart doesn't function right, his eyes no longer benefit him, his ears no longer benefit him. He is like the living dead, Ibn Qayyim says. He is like the living dead, and he is like a zombie walking on the face of the earth. He's like a person who's already dead. He's like a person who's already dead. His heart is dead because it is lacking knowledge and sincerity and love of Allah and love of what Allah loves and lofty morality and so on and so forth. And he is from the lowest of the low, lower than the animals. And he is like a shaitan himself, and Allah's refuge is sought. And so Allah has cast and placed enmity between the shaitan of the person and their angel, he says. وَالْعَدَاوَةَ بَيْنَ الْعَقْلِ وَبَيْنَ الْهَوَى. And he has placed enmity between the intellect of a person and between their desires. A person is says of making logically informed decisions, and decisions that are based on weighing harms and benefits, which is the meaning of intellect in Islam. And that إِذَا عَقَلَكَ عَقْلُكَ عَمَّا لَا يَنْبَغِي فَأَنْتَ عَاقِلٌ. As Ibn Hibban rahimahullah ta'ala, he said in that tremendous book he wrote about a character called Rawdatul Uqala, and the garden of the wise, of the people of intellect. And that one, your intellect prevents you from that which is unbecoming and harmful, then you are considered to be intelligent. The word aql in the Arabic language means to hold something back. To hold something back. A person being able to have self-restraint and to control their self and self-control, that is a sign of intellect. And when they don't judge by weighing the harms and the benefits of that which is good in this world and the next, and harmful in this world and the next, and make decisions informed upon intellect, then they judge by their hawa. And there is a war between intellect and desires, between intellect and desires. وَالْعَدَاوَةَ بَيْنَ النَّفْسِ الْأَمَّارَةِ وَبَيْنَ الْقَلْبِ. And there is enmity between the nafs that is insisting upon evil and commanding with evil, and between the heart, meaning the iman in the heart of a person. وَبَتَلَ الْعَبْدَ بِذَلِكَ وَجَمَعَ لَهُ بَيْنَ هَؤُلَاءِ وَأَمَدَّ كُلَّ حِزْبٍ بِجُنُودٍ وَعَوَانٍ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has tested the slave with all of this. He has tested the slave with this war within. This isn't a metaphor, this is a reality. This is what is happening inside of you every day, every minute, every waking moment, and even in a person's sleep. To the point that Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala explains in some of his writings that the dreams of a person are either from his nafs or from what? Or from the shaitan or from the angels. Or from the angels, ilham, from the malaika, inspiration from the angels. And so even when a person is sleeping, this war is happening. Even when a person is sleeping in a state of manam or a state of yaqadha, in a state of sleep and slumber, or in a state of wakefulness, there is a war happening in the person's heart between the angels and the shaitan, between his nafs and the iman in his heart, between his nafs and his heart. And this is the war that Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala is elaborating upon here. فَلَا يَزَالُ الْحَرْبُ سِجَالًا وَدُوَلًا بين الفريقين إلى أن يستولي أحدهما على الآخر ويكون الآخر مقهورا معه. And this war continues and it alternates between the two sides Sometimes the shaitan is victorious. Sometimes the angels are victorious. Sometimes your nafs is victorious. Sometimes your heart is victorious. And each of them, until one dominates the other and the other becomes subjugated and captured by the victor. فَإِذَا كَانَتِ النَّوْبَةُ لِلْقَلْبِ وَالْعَقْلِ وَالْمَلَكِ. Then he mentions something here that he wrote a whole chapter about, that Sheikh Hamza in about 2.5 hours or so covered the 50-something pages that he covered yesterday, which is that Tawheed and Iman in the heart, and knowing Allah and loving Allah and making Allah the most important priority in your life, and cementing and strengthening your connection with Allah and your attachment to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala is the cause of all happiness and joy and bliss in the heart and all goodness in this world and the next. And Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he explained that point elaborately over the course of more than 50 pages, as was read yesterday. So Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, here he says, فَإِذَا كَانَتِ النَّوْبَةُ لِلْقَلْبِ وَالْعَقْلِ وَالْمَلَكِ. Then when victory belongs to the heart, the intellect and the angel, فَهُنَالِكَ السُّرُورُ وَالنَّعِيمُ وَلَذَّةُ وَالْبَهْجَةُ. Then there is happiness, bliss, pleasure, delight, وَالْفَرَحْ, joy, وَقُرَّةُ الْعَيْنِ, and the coolness of the eye. The phrase the coolness of the eye is a fa'idah, is a good fa'idah, like the dua, "Oh Allah, make from our أزواجنا وذريتنا قرة العيون," make from our spouse and our families the coolness of our eye. The coolness of our eye. And in the coolness of one's eye, like the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي مَاذَا؟ The salat. And in the coolness of my eye has been made the salat, is where a person is so happy they cry. And when a person cries out of happiness, when a person cries out of sadness, their tears are hot and they burn. And you look at a person's eyes and their eyes are red and they're frustrated and so on and so forth. When a person cries out of happiness, their tears are cool. Their tears are cool. When a person is so elated and joyed by their iman that they have tears of happiness. They have tears of happiness. He says, when victory belongs to the heart and the intellect and the angel in connection with one another and cooperation with one another, فَهُنَالِكَ السُّرُورُ وَالنَّعِيمُ وَلَذَّةُ وَالْبَهْجَةُ وَالْفَرَحُ وَقُرَّةُ الْعَيْنِ. Then the person will experience happiness, bliss, pleasure, delight, joy, and coolness of the eye. وَطِيبُ الْحَيَاةِ, and the sweetness of life. When شِرَاحُ الصَّدْرِ, and the expansion of the chest will be open and the person will find comfort in their heart. وَالْفَوْزُ بِالْغَنَائِمِ, and they will gain the spoils and the victory and the spoils and the booty that comes from winning a war. فَإِذَا كَانَتَ النَّوْبَةُ لِلنَّفْسِ وَالْهَوَى وَالشَّيْطَانِ. However, on the other hand, when victory belongs, whenever, because this can happen on a day-to-day basis, on a momentary basis even, from 1 hour to the next, a person wins some and he loses some. And there are many battles, many skirmishes, many wars and that sort of thing that occur inside of his heart on a daily basis. وَإِذَا كَانَتَ النَّوْبَةُ لِلنَّفْسِ وَالْهَوَى وَالشَّيْطَانِ. However, whenever victory belongs to the self, the desires and the shaitan, فَهُنَالِكَ الْغُمُومِ. And when they collude and collaborate to win and to defeat the iman in your heart, فَهُنَالِكَ الْغُمُومُ وَالْحُمُومُ وَالْأَحْزَانُ وَأَنْوَاعُ الْمَكَارِهِ وَضِيقُ الصَّدْرِ وَحَبْسُ الْمَلِكِ. Then what comes as a result of that is sorrow, worry, grief, anxiety, a variety of hated outcomes, constriction and tightness of the chest, and the imprisonment of the king. That the king is dethroned, and the king is the heart. And the king is the heart, that the king is dethroned. That the king is dethroned, and that he is taken as a prisoner. Al-Imam Ibn Qayyim, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions, as we'll hear inshallah ta'ala in the next lesson with Sheikh Ahmed, that all of the sicknesses of our heart come from the self that is commanding evil. And the greatest liability that a person has is their own nafs. And the scholars have written, a number of them, beautiful dialogues between the iman in a person's heart and their nafs that is amara bisu. And that a person needs to have a talk. They need to sit down and talk to their self. And they need to bring their self and on the same page as their heart, to know that if the nafs wants everything that it could ever want in this world and the next, of happiness and joy and bliss and pleasure and so on and so forth, that can only be attained and obtained by obedience to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, safety and wealth and well-being and blessed sustenance and a happy family and a happy life, the good of this world, the good of the next, and the bliss of the paradise, is food, is drinks, is delights, is sexual pleasures, all that the self craves for and has an insatiable thirst for, can only be gotten by Iman and obedience to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, at the beginning of the 11th chapter of Ighathat al-Ahfan, he makes a statement. He says, فَإِنَّ السَّائِرَ أَمْرَاضِ الْقَلْبِ. Indeed, سَائِرَ أَمْرَاضِ الْقَلْبِ. Sa'ir means all or the rest of something. Here it means all. Indeed, all of the heart sicknesses, إِنَّمَا تَنْشَأُ مِنْ جَانِبِ النَّفْسِ, originate from an-nafs. From the direction, they come from the direction of the nafs. All of the sicknesses of the heart come from the nafs. Every last one of them. Every last one of them. فَالْمَوَادُ الْفَاسِدَ كُلُّهَا إِلَيْهَا تَنْصَبُّ. And all corrupt substances pour towards the heart from the self. And they are poured upon the heart from the nafs. The nafs pours corrupt poisons and corrupt toxins and substances upon the heart. Every corruption, every corrupt thing that reaches the heart comes from the nafs. ثُمَّ تَنْبَعِثُ مِنْهَا إِلَى الْأَعْضَاءِ. And then from the heart, that corruption pours to the a'adha. And from the nafs, it penetrates the heart, and then it floods the limbs. And then it floods the limbs. وَأَوَّلُ مَا تَنَالُ الْقَلْبِ. And the first thing that they reach was the heart. And so if the heart was not fortified with faith, with the dhikr of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and beneficial knowledge and sincerity and love of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and those sorts of things, and protected from evil traits, and protected from evil traits that are the evil traits of the nafs, then the heart will be vulnerable, or the heart will be dethroned, and the limbs, the eyes of the person, the ears of the person will be directed by the shaitan, to all evil. And Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he discusses this in some great detail in his book Ad-Da'u wa-Dawa, likewise in his book Bada'i al-Fawaid, and other places in his writings, the war between the nafs and the shaitan, and the iman in the heart of the person, and how the shaitan uses his shayateen, and he uses his minions and his legions to direct the eyes of a person towards all evil, and the ears of a person towards all evil, and discourages them from listening to anything of beneficial knowledge or the recitation of the Quran, to go from the recitation of the Quran to the recitation of the shaitan, and from listening to good advice to listening to malahi, and to false entertainment and false amusement, and so on and so forth. Likewise is the case with the eyes, likewise is the case with the limbs, and that a person uses their faculties and the organs of their body and the parts of their body in a way that will lead them ultimately to their destruction. All of that starts with the nafs. All of that starts with the nafs. Later in that chapter, he said, وَقَدْ اتَّفَقَ السَّارِكُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى اخْتِلَافِ طُرُقِهِمْ وتباين سلوكهم على أن النفس قاطعة بين القلب وبين الوصول إلى الرب سبحانه في علاه، وأنه لا يدخل عليه سبحانه ولا يوصل إليه إلا بعد تركها وإماتتها بمخالفتها والظفر بها. Those upon the spiritual path, journeying towards Allah, upon the path of Islam, which is the only path that will lead you to Allah, those journeying towards Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, despite their varied paths and various approaches, and people who talk about spiritual paths in general, from the people of Sunnah, the people of innovation, and people even outside of the fold of Islam, generally they agree upon the fact. And there's a very similar statement to this statement in the book Al-Muwafaqat by Shatibi rahimahullah ta'ala, that this is something that is agreed upon by the nations. That in order to have success individually as a society, a person has to oppose instantaneous gratification. And they call it delayed gratification, right? Delayed gratification. And if a person wants to be successful academically, if a person wants to be successful in any regard, in a worldly sense or in a religious sense, they have to delay their gratification. They have to have their self in check. They have to have their self in check. He said that those who are journeying towards Allah and those upon a spiritual path, even though they may take different approaches, some of them correct, some of them erroneous, and they agree that the nafs itself, that what is the barrier, that the nafs itself, that the self of a person, that the inner self of a person is qati'ah, and he is a barrier بين القلب وبين الوصول إلى الرب سبحانه وتعالى, between the heart and reaching Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They all agree upon this. However, only the people of Sunnah know how to remove those barriers, and they know the maka'id of shaitan. And this is something very important, because it was written by Ahlul Bid'ah from the Mutasawwifa, like Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who codified and made tasawwuf an academic discipline, to the point that his books are even studied in academia today in the Western world. And that what they came with was from the most dangerous of matters that lead people to al-ilhad al-mahd, wal-ittihad wal-hulul, to pure ilhad, to pure negation of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala and the religion of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, and the lead a person to monism, to believing that by following the spiritual path that Allah can become incarnate in you, and that Allah is everywhere in all things and in all places and that sort of thing, which is pure disbelief and pure heresy. And so the people of Sunnah, they have with them the only source of tazkiyatun nafs, the only source of purifying the soul, which is what the prophets came with. Tibb al-qulub, and the medicine of the hearts, was what the messengers were sent with, alayhim as-salatu was-salam. There is no other way to know about this topic except by way of the messengers, except by way of what is in Kitab and Sunnah. To the point that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala said that there are more innovations connected to suluk and amal and ibadah, invented by the mystics and so on and so forth. There are more innovations when it comes to these matters, talking about the spiritual path and the states of the heart, and how to get close to Allah, and making muraqabah and being mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing that Allah is watching you and all these sorts of things. There are more innovations connected to these matters than the innovations connected to aqaid, to matters of belief. It's a heavy statement. There are more innovations in this regard than innovations in that regard. He said, but they all agree, Ibn Qayyim says, they all agree that the heart, that the self rather, is the greatest obstacle and barrier between the heart and reaching Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. وَأَنَّهُ لَا يُدْخَلُ عَلَيْهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَلَا يُوصَلُ إِلَيْهِ إِلَّا بَعْدَ تَرْكِهَا. And that a person, that no one is allowed to approach Allah or to reach Allah except after abandoning the nafs. Except after abandoning the nafs, وَإِمَاتَتِهَا, and killing the nafs. Not suicide, killing the nafs, meaning killing the passions and desires of the nafs that are harmful and impermissible. بِمُخَالَفَتِهَا وَظَفَرِ بِهَا, by opposing the self and the desires of the self and defeating the self. فَإِنَّ النَّاسَ عَلَى قِسْمَيْنِ, for indeed all of people are two categories. People are of two categories. قِسْمٌ ظَفِرَتْ بِهِ نَفْسُ فَمَلَكَتْهُ وَأَهْلَكَتْهُ وَصَارَتْ طَوْعًا لَهَا تَحْتَ أَوَامِرِهَا. The first category are people who have been defeated by their own selves, by their own inner selves, by their own inner selves. A category of people whose selves have overcome them. He said, فَمَلَكَتْهَا وَأَهْلَكَتْهُ, and so they have been dominated and destroyed by their self. وَصَارَ طَوْعًا لَهَا تَحْتَ أَوَامِرِهَا. I looked at Thursday. To the point that they willingly follow the commands of their inner self without any hesitation. Whatever their self urges them with, then they comply with that. They comply with that, no matter, without looking at the awaqib al-umur, without looking at the outcomes, any of the harmful outcomes that will come as a result of instantaneous gratification and these sorts of things. They just do whatever comes to them, whatever their self suggests to them, and they are destroyed by their own self. وَقِسْمٌ ظَفِرُوا بِنُفُوسِهِمْ. The second category of people are people who ظَفِرُوا بِنُفُوسِهِمْ, who defeat their own selves. فَقَهَرُوهَا فَصَارَتْ تَوْعًا لَهُمْ مُنْقَادَةً لِأَوَامِرِهِمْ. And they, by doing so, they dominate their selves. They dominate their selves, and their souls become willingly obedient to the commands that they issue. Meaning their souls become compliant with Iman, and are upon Iman. كما قال بعض العارفين انتهى سفر الطالبين إلى ظفر بأنفسهم. As was stated by one of the Arifin, one of those who had intimate knowledge about the ahwal and maqamat and manazil of the heart, of the journey of the heart and the stations that it reaches on this journey, and so on and so forth. They said that the safar al-talibin, that the journey of the seekers, the journey of those who intend to reach Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, whose greatest ultimate objective is reaching Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, is al-dhafar bi anfusihim. It ends when they overcome themselves. They have reached the end of their journey when they have defeated themselves, and when they have self-control, when they have this type of discipline where they can control themselves. فَمَنْ ظَفِرَ بِنَفْسِهِ أَفْلَحَ وَأَنْجَحَ وَمَنْ ظَفِرَتْ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ خَسِرَ وَهَلَكَ. So whoever has defeated his self, meaning the iman in his heart, has overcome his self by the help of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, أَفْلَحَ وَأَنْجَحَ. And this person is successful, and this person is victorious. وَمَنْ ظَفِرَتْ بِهِ نَفْسُهُ خَسِرَ وَهَلَكَ. And the person who is defeated by his self has lost, and he is destroyed. As Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He said, فَأَمَّا مَنْ طَغَى وَآثَرَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا فَإِنَّ الْجَحِيمَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. As for the person who exceeds all the bounds set by Allah and gives precedence and priority to the life of this world, then the hellfire is their ultimate abode. وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. And as for the person who fears standing in front of their Lord and forbids their nafs from al-hawa, this is a shahid, and forbids their nafs, their inner self, from al-hawa, from its desires, فَإِنَّ الْجَنَّةَ هِيَ الْمَأْوَى. Then indeed the paradise is al-ma'wa, is his ultimate abode. فَالنَّفْسُ تَدْعُو إِلَى الطُّغْيَانِ وَإِيثَارِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَالرَّبُّ تَعَالَى يَدْعُو الْعَبْدِ إِلَى خَوْفِهِ وَنَهِي النَّفْسِ عَنِ الْهَوَى. For indeed the self invites to a tughyan, to transgress, وَإِيثَارِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, and to give precedence and priority to the life of this world, whereas al-Rabb Tabarak wa Ta'ala, the nurturing Lord, exalted be He the Most High, He invites His slaves and His servants إِلَى خَوْفِهِ, to fear Him, وَنَهِي النَّفْسِ عَنِ الْهَوَى, and to forbid themselves and restrain themselves from their hawa. وَالْقَلْبُ بَيْنَ الدَّاعِعَيْنِ. And the heart is between these two callers, the invitation from their nafs and the invitation from Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. يَمِيلُ إِلَى هَذَا الدَّاعِ مَرَّةً وَإِلَى هَذَا مَرَّةً. Sometimes it inclines more towards one than the other, and at other times it inclines toward the other more than the first. وَهَذَا مَوْضِعُ الْمِحْنَةِ وَالْإِبْتِلَاءِ. And this is where the ibtila and the mihna occurs. And he is being pulled between these two invitations, between this da'wah and that da'wah, between this caller and that caller, this invitation and that invitation. Likewise, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah rahmatan wasi'ah, he explains in his book Iddatul Sabirin, النفس مطية العبد الذي يسير عليها إلى الجنة أو النار. That the nafs of the person, that their inner self, that it is the mount, it is the vehicle, the vessel upon which a person travels either to paradise or hell. The nafs of a person is the vessel, it is the vehicle that a person rides, the mount that they ride to the paradise or to the hellfire. وَالصَّبْرُ لَهَا بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْخِطَامِ وَالزِّمَامِ لِلْمَطِيَّةِ. And being patient in dealing with the self, in restraining the self. The literal definition of patience is habsu nafs, is restraining the self, self-restraint. Restraining yourself upon obedience, restraining yourself away from disobedience, and restraining yourself from being displeased with what Allah has tested you with that is painful in your life. Habsu nafs. And so, as-sabru laha, self-restraint, which is the meaning of patience, بِمَنْزِلَةِ الْخِطَامِ وَالزِّمَامِ لِلْمَطِيَّةِ. And it is tantamount, or it is like the bridle and the rein for the mount. And if a person just jumps on the back of a horse without a saddle, without a bit, without a bridle, without a jaw latch or any type of gear on the horse, and what's the horse going to do? What's the horse going to do? Would you just run up to a random horse that wasn't broken, that wasn't trained, that wasn't tamed, and just jump on it? The horse is going to run all over the place with you. A horse is going to take you to ar-rada. It's going to take you to destruction. It's going to take you to destruction. It's going to throw you off its back. It may kick you with its back feet even. Right? A horse is going to rebel against you because you haven't disciplined it. He said, so patience is like the bridle and the rein for the mount. Patience is like the bridle and the rein for the mount. And there is a hadith that is great to be Hasan li ghayrihi by Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, reported by Tabarani from the hadith of Abu Hurairah in Al-Mu'jam al-Kabir, and reported by Al-Bazar in his Musnad, and reported by Ibn Abi Dunya in Muhasabatu Nafs from the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma wa ardahuma, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, that he gave a similar parable, but in connection to, and how when you have humility and you suppress yourself, that you control your nafs, that you control yourself from destruction. When the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he is reported to have said, ما من آدمي, that there is not a human being إلا وفي رأسه حكمة بيد ملك, that there is not a human being except that he has في رأسه, in his head, حكمة. A حكمة, the scholars they say, is a hadida mustadira على الحنك. It is a circular piece of iron, like the bit that goes in the mouth of the horse, or like what is called a jaw latch, a metal jaw latch that goes underneath the jaw of the horse. Biyadi malik, that there is a jaw latch that is connected, and it's a piece of iron connected to a bridle and connected to reins. Biyadi malik, in the hands of an angel. فَإِذَا تَوَاضَعَ, when he is humble, قِيلَ لِلْمَلَكِ, it is said to the angel, إِرْفَعْ حَكَمَتَ, lift up his hakama. Lift up his hakama, pull up his hakama, meaning pull up the reins and direct him towards the good. And the scholars, they have two ways that they explain this. One, and he direct the person to the good, inspire him with the good. As comes in the statement of Ibn Mas'ud that is authentic, where Ibn Mas'ud, he said that the shaitan has a lamma min ibn Adam. The shaitan has a nuzul and a lamsa, and it descends and it touches the human being, and the shaitan descends and touches the human being at different times. The touch of the angel is i'adun bil khair wa tasdiqun bil haqq, is to encourage the people with, and encourage the believer with the good, promise them the good, and to encourage them and reinforce them to believe in the truth. And the touch of the angel is the opposite of that. So in this hadith, the hadith of Abu Hurairah ibn Abbas, is great to be authentic by Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, about the hakama, the jaw latch, that is, and it connected to the reins and the bridle and that sort of thing. And he, إِذَا تَوَاضَعَ, when he is humble, قِيلَ لِلْمَلَكِ إِرْفَعْ حَكَمَتَ, it is said to the angel, lift up his hakama, meaning direct him towards the good, inspire him with the good. Inspire him with the good. And another explanation of the scholars, as is mentioned by Ibn al-Anbari and others, they say that irfa hakamata, they say when a person is dignified, they can walk with their head up. And to the point that some of the Salaf, and is reported from Umar ibn al-Khattab and Aisha and others, and that humility is something that is in the heart. It's not necessarily something upon the posture of your head. The posture of your head. Some people think humility is to walk around with your head bowed. right? That person is humble. That person is humble. And Islam is a religion of izzatun nafs, of self-dignity. Iman gives a person dignity. A person should walk around with their head up. They don't have to walk around looking like, a family member just died, or looking depressed and miserable all the time. Islam is a religion of happiness and joy and thriving and so on and so forth. And so this is one explanation they give. I need to lift up his head. To lift up his head instead of walking around disgraced and dishonored, so on and so forth. Because a person who humbles himself for Allah, then Allah will raise them. And Allah will raise them. وَإِذَا تَكَبَّرْ قِيلَ لِلْمَلَكِ دَعَ حَكَمَتَ. And when he is arrogant, it is said to the angel, da'a, and in one wording, da'a hakamata. And he let go of his reins, or lower his reins, meaning lower his head, humiliate him. Humiliate this person, direct that person, and he leave off directing that person to the good, to the point that he humiliates himself, meaning. And so the nafs of the person is a mount that he rides either to the paradise or to the fire. If his nafs is mutma'inna, and he content and happy upon iman and righteous deeds and that sort of thing, and his heart is healthy, then his nafs will take him to the paradise by the permission of Allah and the help of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. And if his nafs is ammara and is left unchecked and untamed and that sort of thing, then it will take him to the fire. فَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لِلْمَطِيَّةِ خِطَامٌ وَزِمَامٌ شَرَدَتْ فِي كُلِّ مَذْهَبٍ. And if there is no bridle or rein upon his nafs, then it will take him in every direction. It will stray in every direction. وَحُفِظَ مِنْ خُطَبِ الْحَجَّاجِ وَهُوَ حَجَّاجُ بْنُ يُوسُف الثَّقَفِي. And has been memorized from the khutab, from the sermons of Hajjaj, in as much as a Hajjaj is a tyrant, and he was deputized by the ruler in his time, and the people of authority would even give the khutbah. So Hajjaj, it was reported that he gave a khutbah on one occasion, and he said the following words, and these words that you are about to hear are reported almost verbatim, word for word, authentically from Al-Hasan al-Basri, rahimahullah ta'ala. And he said, اقدعوا هذه النفوس فإنها طلعة إلى كل سوء. اقدعوا أي كفوا هذه النفوس. اقدعوا أي كفوا هذه النفوس. Restrain these nufus, these selves, these souls of yours. فإنها طلعة إلى كل سوء. Because they are avidly looking for all sorts of evil. طلعة, they are always looking for. They are extremely curious, meaning. And they are always looking for every sort of evil. فَرَحِمَ اللَّهُ امْرَأً جَعَلَ لِنَفْسِهِ خِطَامًا وَزِمَامًا. May Allah have mercy upon a man who places upon his nafs خِطَامًا وَزِمَامًا, yani a bridle and a rein. A bridle and a rein upon his soul, upon himself. فَقَادَهَا بِخِطَامِهَا إِلَى طَاعَةِ اللَّهِ. And he leads himself with his reins to the obedience of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. He uses the ability to choose what he knows, and his intellect and his knowledge of the religion and his love of the religion and that sort of thing, and the iman in his heart, and he to direct him towards all good. وَصَرَفَهَا بِزِمَامِهَا عَنْ مَعْصِيَةِ اللَّهِ. And uses the reins to pull him away from disobedience to Allah. فَإِنَّ الصَّبْرَ عَنْ مَحَارِمِ اللَّهِ أَيْسَرُ مِنَ الصَّبْرِ عَلَى عَذَابِهِ. For certainly he said, it is easier to be patient in leaving off disobedience to Allah than being patient in enduring the torment of Allah. And Allah's refuge sought. قُلْتُ وَالنَّفْسُ فِيهَا قُوَّتَانِ. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that there are two strengths of the nafs. The nafs has two strengths. It has two strengths. قُوَّةُ الْإِقْدَامِ, the ability and strength to go forward, وَقُوَّةُ الْإِحْجَامِ, and the ability and the strength to withhold and to hold back. فَحَقِيقَةُ الصَّبْرِ أَنْ يَجْعَلَ قُوَّةِ الْإِقْدَامِ مَصْرُوفَةً إِلَى مَا يَنْفَعُهُ. And so the reality of patience, he said, is to make the ability and the strength to move forward and to race forward, مَصْرُوفَةً إِلَى مَا يَنْفَعُهُ, to direct it completely towards what will benefit the person. To use your physical energy to move forward and to progress towards what will benefit you, as comes in the description of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for al-mu'min al-qawi. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ihris ala ma yanfa'uka wasta'in billahi wa la ta'jiz." Be diligent in doing what will benefit you. That's the description of the strong believer. And seek the assistance of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and don't be lazy. And don't be lazy. So the person uses his ability of iqdam, of advancing and having audacity. Iqdam, sometimes it means shaja'a, jur'a, audacity. He uses the audacity that he has and the courage that he has and his ability to progress and move forward and his zeal to, he focuses those abilities ila ma yanfa'uhu, that they are masrufatin ila ma yanfa'uhu, that they are directed and focused upon what will benefit him. وَقُوَّةَ الْإِحْجَامِ إِمْسَاكًا عَمَّا يَضُرُّ, and he uses his ability to withhold and restrain himself, عَمَّا يَضُرُّ, from that which will harm him. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَكُونُ صَبْرُهُ عَلَى فِعْلِ مَا يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ وَثَبَاتُ عَلَيْهِ أَقْوَى مِنْ صَبْرِهِ عَمَّا يَضُرُّ فيصبر على مشقة الطاعة ولا صبر له من داعي هواه إلى ارتكاب ما نهي عنه. Some people have more ability to be patient, and their patience is stronger in doing what is love to Allah and obedience to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala than their ability to leave off disobedience. And some people, they are vice versa. Some people, they are the opposite of that. And the best of the people, أصبرهم على نوعين, who are those who are the most patient in doing what will benefit them and restraining themselves from what will harm them. فَكَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ يَصْبِرُ عَلَى مُكَابَدَةِ قِيَامِ اللَّيْلِ فِي الْحَرِّ وَالْبَرْدِ وَعَلَى مَشَقَّةِ الصِّيَامِ وَلَا يَصْبِرُ عَنْ نَظْرَةٍ مُحَرَّمَةٍ. He said there are some people who have the ability to work hard in standing in the night prayer in the heat and in the cold and enduring the patience of fasting, but they don't have the patience that is required from restraining their eyes from looking at what is forbidden. وَكَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ يَصْبِرُ عَنَ النَّظَرِ. Many people, they have the ability to refrain themselves and restrain themselves from looking at what is haram. وَعَنَ الْالْتِفَاتِ إِلَى الصُّوَرِ, and looking at things that they are obsessed with or crave or fantasize about. وَلَا صَبْرَ لَهُ عَلَى الْأَمْرِ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَنَهْيِ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَجِهَادِ الْكُفَارِ وَالْمُنَافِقِينَ. They have a lot of ability to restrain themselves and to have patience to do that, but they don't have the patience that is required to order the good and forbid the evil and advise for the sake of Allah, to strive against the disbelievers and the hypocrites. بَلْ هُوَ أَضْعَفُ شَيْءٍ فِي هَذَا وَعَجَزُ. They are the weakest of people when it comes to that, to ordering the good, forbidding the evil. And they are upon the ethos of modern society. And if you were to say that there is one characteristic that Western society is built upon, to the point that many Western academics have written exhaustively on this topic, as being the thing that is going to bring this entire society down, it is what they call non-judgmentalism. Non-judgmentalism. Everybody has their own wijhatun nadar, they have their own opinion, they have their own viewpoint. I can't say that what I'm upon is right and what you're upon is wrong. I can have my own personal views, you have your own personal views. I have my own chosen morality, you have your own chosen morality. I have my own version of right and wrong, you have your own version of right and wrong. That is fawda, that is chaos. That is chaos. And as we heard from the words of Ibn Qayyim, and as we alluded to from the words of Ash-Shatibi, rahimahullah ta'ala, that throughout history, all of the nations have been unanimous upon the fact that that is the cause of societal decay. To the point that one writer in 1978 and 1979, whose name is Daniel Bell, and he wrote a book called The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism or something of the sort, as a basis for his entire book, he quoted exhaustively from Ibn Khaldun, rahimahullah ta'ala. Ibn Khaldun, and he's a Muslim historian, and who wrote about the cause of the rise and the fall of nations from an Islamic perspective. And what we have as Muslims, and about what causes success and progress, and what causes failure and collapse and so on and so forth in every regard. And he is the tib, the medicine that was sent with the prophets and the messengers, alayhim as-salatu was-salam, and it is what people are looking for. It is what people are looking for. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, and so many people, they don't have the ability to order the good and forbid the evil. They have no patience when it comes to this. To invite to Allah, so on and so forth. You see people, they take that type of approach in their parenting even. They take that approach in their parenting. Even they say, we don't want to break the child. We don't want to break the child. When we grew up, it was different. They say, if you do what? You'll spoil the child. Spare the... Right. Now, it's not saying go get a rod and beat your kids over the side, over the top of their head, right? We're saying, but, put it in a place where they can see it. That's an option if it needs, and if needs be, right? And so, many people, they take that approach even in their own homes of commanding the good or forbidding the evil and calling to Allah Ta'ala, and they say that doing this is munaffir. It's going to run people away, and it's divisive, it's going to cause fitna, so on and so forth. But when it comes to being patient and staying away from sins and disobedience and so on and so forth, they find the ability to do that. He says, وَأَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا صَبْرَ لَهُ عَلَى وَاحِدْ مِنَ نَوْعَيْنِ. He said, but the vast majority of people have no patience in this or in that. And progressing towards what will benefit them or refraining from that which will harm them. وَأَقَلُّهُمْ أَصْبَرُهُمْ فِي الْمَوْضِعَيْنِ. He said, and the very few, and the rarest of people are those who have patience in both types of patience. وَقِيلَ صَبْرُ ثَبَاتُ بَاعِثِ الْعَقْلِ وَالدِّينِ فِي مُقَابَلَةِ بَاعِثِ الشَّهْوَةِ وَالطَّبْعِ. And it has been said that patience is the steadiness and having determination and the strength of the drive of reason and religion in the face of the drive of one's lust and one's inner nature. This is the war within. This is the war within, the fight and the conflict between your intellect and your religion on the one hand, and your desires and your corrupt nature on the other hand. وَمَعْنَ هَذَا إِنَ الطَّبْيَ تَقَاضَ مَا يُحِبُّ. And the meaning of this is that a person's inner nature and the way that their nafs is, that it demands what it craves and likes. وَبَاعِثُ الْعَقْلِ وَالدِّينِ يَمْنَعُ مِنْهُ. However, the motivation that comes from their intellect and the drive that comes from their intellect and their deen prevents them from that and prohibits them from that. فَالْحَرْبُ قَائِمَةٌ بَيْنَهُمَا وَهِيَ سِجَالٌ. And there is a war between this and between that. Between these two sides, وَهِيَ سِجَالٌ, and it alternates in its fortunes. And the victors, they alternate. Sometimes your intellect and your iman in your heart is victorious, and sometimes your nafs and your corrupt nature is victorious. وَمَعْرِكَةُ هَذِهِ الْحَرْبِ قَلْبُ الْعَبْدِ. In the battlefield of this war is the heart of the person. وَصَبْرُ الشَّجَاعَةُ وَالثَّبَاتِ. And patience is to have courage and to have steadfastness. And patience is that a person has courage and resolve to carry out this war and has steadfastness and determination throughout this war. Elsewhere, Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions the three types of heart as it relates to this war. As it relates to this war, he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, in the same book, عِدَةُ الصَّابِرِينَ وَذَخِيرَةُ الشَّاكِرِينَ وَالْقُلُوبُ ثَلَاثَةٌ. There are three hearts. Hearts are of three kinds. قَلْبٌ خَالٍ مِنَ الْإِيمَانِ وَجَمِيعٍ خَيْرٍ. The first type of heart is a heart that is devoid of faith in all good. فَذَلِكَ قَلْبٌ مُظْلِمٌ. And this is a darkened heart. A dead and dark heart. This is a darkened heart. قَدْ اسْتَرَاحَ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنْ إِلْقَاءِ الْوَسَاوِسِ إِلَيْهِ. And the shaitan has found ease from casting whisperings into it. And the shaitan doesn't have to spend much time attacking this person because they're already dead. This person is already gone. He's already joined forces with the shaitan, and his nafs is already doing the job of the shaitan. Shaitan has found ease from casting whisperings into it because the shaitan has made it his home. لأنه قد اتخذه بيتا ووطنا. He doesn't have to defeat this heart because his heart is already his home. He's already conquered the fortress of the heart and made the heart the home that he can take residence in and his abode. وَتَحَكَّمَ فِيهِ بِمَا يُرِيدُ. And he controls it as he wishes. وَتَمَكَّنَ مِنْهُ غَايَةَ تَمَكُّنْ. And he has the utmost domination over this heart. The shaitan, with the least effort, already has the utmost domination over this heart that is dead and that is dark. وَالْقَلْبُ الثَّانِي. The second type of heart, قَلْبٌ قَدْ اسْتَنَارَ بِنُورِ الْإِيمَانِ وَأَوْقَدَ فِيهِ مِصْبَاحُ. And the second type of heart is a heart that is illuminated and enlightened by the light of faith. By the light of faith. Meaning knowing about Allah, knowing about the prophets, knowing about the unseen, knowing about the religion of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and complying with that. There's the reality of faith, at-tasdiq wal-inqiyad. He said, a heart that has been illuminated with the light of faith, وَأَوْقَدَ فِيهِ مِصْبَاحُ, and the lantern of faith has been lit within it. لَكِنَّ عَلَيْهِ ظُلْمَةَ شَهَوَاتٍ. However, over that heart, although there is the light of faith to some degree, he has also of iman. His heart is not dead, and his heart is not without light entirely or life entirely, but his heart is sick. He says, over this heart, upon this heart, there's ظُلْمَةَ الشَّهَوَاتِ وَعَوَاسِفِ الْأَهْوَاءِ. And there is the darkness, it is clouded by the darkness of his passions and desires and lusts. وَعَوَاسِفِ الْأَهْوَاءِ. And by the tempest and the storms, by the storms and the tempest of his ahwa, of his whims. فَلِلشَّيْطَانِ هُنَاكَ إِقْبَالٌ وَإِدْبَارٌ وَمُجَاوَلَاتٌ وَمَطَامِعٌ. And so the shaitan, therefore, has a means to approach and retreat when he needs. To the point that the scholars, they say that when they are more than just desires, and they become sifatun rasikha. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he gives a parable elsewhere in his writings. He said when these things become any characteristics of the heart, how the heart is, that even the dhikr of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala doesn't keep the shaitan away. Because this is like meat in front of a hungry dog. You're giving the shaitan fuel on a regular basis. Not like the person who has incidental passions and desires that they can fight off with the dhikr of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. But this person who has kibr and ujub, and the person who has hasad, person who has arrogance and conceit, and the person who is astonished with their self, and the person who is jealous and envious, and the person who is greedy and doesn't care about where their wealth comes from. مَا حَلَّ فِي يَدِهِ فَهُوَ حَلَالٌ. Whatever falls in his hand is halal. And if the person who is like that, then even if he engages in the dhikr of Allah, which is the greatest means to protect himself from the shaitan, as the Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, that the dhikr of Allah doesn't even chase the shaitan away until he works on these sicknesses in his heart. And if there is a storm occurring in his heart, he may have some iman. Ibn Qayyim says, this person, he may have some iman, however, there is the dhulmah on different levels. And there is a storm on one level or another of shahawat, na'awasib of ahwa, and the shaitan can come and go. And the shaitan has mujawalat, he has conflicts and battles and skirmishes upon the heart of a person. And he has matami', and he has ways that he expects, any things that he sees as vulnerabilities by which he expects to defeat that person ultimately. So that person becomes from the hizb of shaitan. وَالْقَلْبُ الثَّالِث قَلْبٌ مَحْشُوبٌ بِالْإِيمَانِ. And the third heart is a heart that is filled with iman. قَدْ اسْتَنَارَ بِنُورِ الْإِيمَانِ. And illuminated by the light of faith. وَانْقَشَعَتْ عَنْهُ حُجُبُ شَهَوَاتِ. And those layers of darknesses and those barriers and veils of darknesses have been eradicated from his heart and removed from his heart. وَأَقْلَعَتْ عَنْهُ تِلْكَ الظُّلُمَاتِ. And those darknesses, those compounded darknesses have been removed. فَلِنُورِهِ فِي قَلْبِهِ إِشْرَاقٌ. What should happen with the believer, as was the advice of the Salaf, that if you have the ability to be better today than you were yesterday, and to be better tomorrow than you were today, فَفْعَلْ, then do so. That's the ideal condition of the believer, that they are constantly getting better. And what else happens as every day passes? You are getting what? Older. And as you get older, you get wiser, or you should. And your desires become less, or they should. And your desires in yourself has less passions, or it should. So as a person gets older and older and older and older, the more knowledge they should have, the more sincerity they should have, and the more they should be protected from the shaitan and be able to be an example for their families and for their children and their grandchildren and that sort of thing. He says, so there is a heart that is mahshubun bil iman, it is filled with faith, illuminated by the light of faith. And these hujub, and these barriers and veils of passions and lusts and desires have been ripped away. وَأَقْلَعَتْ عَنْهُ تِلْكَ ظُلُمَاتِ. And those compounded layers of darkness have been removed. فَلِنُورِهِ فِي قَلْبِهِ إِشْرَاقٌ وَلِذَلِكَ إشراق ولذلك الإشراق إيقاد لو دنا منه الوسواس أي الشيطان احترق به. He said the person who has a high level of light in his heart, of knowledge and sincerity and so on and so forth in his heart, he said that this light in his heart has ishraq, yani it has illumination. And that light that in his heart has iqad, it is fueled by something. That is what Shaykh Kashif read over the parables of light and life in the Quran. That the light of the heart is likened to a fire. It has two abilities. One, to bring brightness, the other to burn. The other to burn. And some people, when they're holding on to evil and so on and so forth, and the iman that goes in their heart, it can be uncomfortable. It can be uncomfortable for them. They have to make some hard decisions. And they have to let go of some things begrudgingly. However, inshallah ta'ala, the longer they are upon faith, the more it burns that away. Like the blacksmith burns away the impurities in metal, as is mentioned in the parable in which surah? أنزل من السماء ماء فسالت أودية بقدرها إلى قوله سبحانه وتعالى Surah Al-Ra'd, where Allah mentions the two parables. And Allah has sent down water from the heavens, and it causes the valleys, which are the hearts, to fill up according to their measure. Some hearts are constricted and shallow, some hearts are deep and wide. That sort of thing the scholars have elaborated in this parable in great detail. Or like, then Allah gives a parable of the froth and the filth that is burnt out of metal. And the froth that is burnt out of metal and burnt out of gold and that sort of thing. And so, this light in the heart also has iqad. And so just as I just alluded to, when a person has iman in their heart and they're still holding on to some filth, it can make them feel uncomfortable. It can make them feel uncomfortable. They feel some type of wahsha, and they feel pain from sin and disobedience. And that means that their heart is still alive. And then that burning ability, that burning property of iman, and he is turned around against the shaitan. Just like it burns filth out of the nafs. Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that ishraq, that light also has iqad. It is also lit and fueled by something. It is lit on fire by something and fueled by something. There is a fire within. لو دنا منه الوسواس, and if the whisperer, the shaitan, was to try to come close to him with his waswasa, احترق به. He will be burned by that iman in his heart. He will be burned when he tries to get close to the heart of the believer. As comes in a hadith, as reported by Tirmidhi and others, where Yahya ibn Zakaria was commanded to say 5 statements to Banu Israel, to act upon them, and to command Banu Israel to act upon them. And he delayed with the advice, and Isa ibn Maryam said, either you tell them or I will tell them, to the point that he assembled them at the Bayt al-Maqdis, and he commanded them with 5 statements. The last of them, he said, وَأَمُرُكُمْ بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَأَمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And I order you to engage in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَإِنَّ مَثَلَ ذَلِكَ مَثَلُ رَجُلٍ خَرَجَ الْعَدُوء عَنَا أَثَرِهِ سِرَاعًا. Because the likeness of a person who is engaged in the dhikr of Allah is the likeness of a person who has departed and the enemy is chasing him on his heels. They are following in his tracks. حتى إذا أتى على حصن حصين فأحرز نفسه من العدو. Until he arrives at a strong fortress, an impenetrable fortress. And he fortifies himself and protects himself from his enemy. He said that is the likeness of the dhikr of Allah. فَإِنَّ الْعَبْلَ يُحْرِزُ نَفْسَهُ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ إِلَّا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. For indeed the shaitan cannot protect him, for indeed the servant rather cannot protect himself from the shaitan except by way of the dhikr of Allah. Except by way of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the dhikr of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, it will aid the person to strengthen in their iman, and it will chase the shaitan away. And the first thing that a person thinks about when they fall into sin and disobedience, what do they think about? The fact that Allah is what? Watching. And what is that called? Al-Muraqabah. That is called Al-Muraqabah. There's a hadith that is found with At-Tabarani and Mu'jam al-Kabir and graded to be Sahih, to the point that Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that it's Sanad is on the condition of Imam Muslim. Condition of Imam Muslim. And where the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said there are three things. Man fa'alahunna dhaqa ta'am al-iman. Whoever does them will taste the delight or the sweetness of faith. The first is the tawheed of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, to worship Allah alone without shirk. The second was zakat on your wealth. And then there's some detail about giving zakat. Don't give away old animals or sick animals or so on and so forth. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَزَكَّ نَفْسَ. The third, وَزَكَّ نَفْسَ. And the person, زَكَّ نَفْسَ. Zakka, yuzakki, tazkiyah. Right? And then the person, zakka nafsa, makes tazkiyah of his nafs. Allah have mercy upon the companion who said, Ya Rasulullah, wa ma tazkiyatu nafs. O Messenger of Allah, what is tazkiyatu nafs? He said, An ta'alam anna Allah ma'aka haythu kunt. He said that you know that Allah is with you wherever you are. And the scholars, obviously the scholars of hadith, explaining this hadith, they said meaning that Allah is with you in His knowledge, and His hearing, and His seeing, and so on and so forth. Allah is with you wherever you are. To have muraqabah. Muraqabah is the entirety of tazkiyatun nafs. So in the Sufis, and he wrote in length about all these maqamat and manazil, some of which was authentic based on Kitab and Sunnah, much of which is inauthentic, and they took a spiritual path and that was not in accordance to the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, so that they could reach the level of epiphany and al-kashaf, where they start to hear voices and have visions and so on and so forth, and all of that sort of thing. He said that we could say simply that the approach of the Prophet ﷺ and the medicine of the Prophet ﷺ was al-muraqabah. Just to be mindful of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, always think about that, which is the definition of ihsan, and ta'budu Allah ka'annaka tarahu, فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. And muraqabah, it all goes back to al-muraqabah. Not like the Sufis do, where they say, let's sit together and make muraqabah. Okay, now think about Allah, think about the angels, think about the hellfire, okay? Feel free to cry, And they have like a ritual that they do called al-muraqabah. Al-muraqabah is something you do in your car. Al-muraqabah is something you do when you see, that woman that, shaitan istashrafaha, and has beautified in your eyes. It's not as cute as you think she is with her fake everything, right? Fake eyelashes and hair and all to the end of it, right? That's muraqabah. Muraqabah is, when you're doing business and trade, and there's something that is mushtabih, something ambiguous, and it's something that you move forward with, or something that you hold back until you know the answer to, and it's something that you risk your hereafter for or not. Muraqabah is something that a person does at all times. It's not something like that. And it is something that naturally is strengthened in the heart of the believer. The asl of it is from the asl of iman, and it grows and it strengthens with the strengthening of a person's iman. And so this heart that is filled with faith, if the shaitan tries to come close to it, احترق به فهو كالسماء التي حرست بالنجوم. He said, when the heart is filled with faith like this, then his heart will be like the sky that has been fortified with the stars. We know what the stars shoot the devils out of the sky, right? فَلَوْ دَنَ مِنْهَا الشَّيْطَانِ لَيَتَخَطَّاهَا رُجِمَ فَاحْتَرَقَ. And if the shaitan tries to cross a part of the sky that is not allowed to be in, it will be struck out by a projectile and burnt. وَلَيْسَتِ السَّمَاءُ بِأَعْظَمَ حُرْمَةٍ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِ. بِأَعْظَمَ حُرْمَةٍ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِ. He said, and the sky is not something that is more sacred to Allah than the believer. If Allah protected the skies from the shaitan, the sky is not more sacred to Allah than the believer. The believer will be allowed to live أبد الآباد في مجاورة رب العزة والجلال, in the paradise. And the sky, koshitat, and he will be taken out of existence. It will go through its phases, and at the end of times, and it will cease to exist. The sky isn't more sacred to Allah tabarak wa ta'ala min al-mu'min then the believer, وَحِرَاسَةُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى لَهُ أَتَمْ مِنْ حِرَاسَةِ السَّمَاءِ, and Allah's protection for him, for the believer, is more perfect and complete than his protection of the sky. وَالسَّمَاءُ مُتَعَبَّدُ الْمَلَائِكَةِ وَمُسْتَقَرُّ الْوَحْيِ وَفِيهَا أَنْوَارُ الطَّاعَاتِ. He said the sky has a high status. It is a place where the angels worship Allah. This comes in a hadith. There is not the place of 4 asabi', except 4 fingers, except there is an angel that is raki or sajid, that is in ruku or sujood. For Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, أَطَّتِ السَّمَاءُ وَحُقَّ لَهَا أَنْطَئِتْ. The sky moans from the weight of the angels, and it has the right to do so because of the abundance of the numbers of angels in the sky. And the sky has a high place with Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. It is a place where the angels worship Allah. وَمُسْتَقَرُّ الْوَحْيِ, and it is a repository of revelation. It is a place where the revelation descends from the Baytul Izzah to the earth. وَفِيهَا أَنْوَارُ الطَّاعَاتِ, and it is a place in which the lights of obedience, the actions of a person, of people, ascend to Allah, the light of obedience, and it is filled with the light of obedience. وَقَلْبُ الْمُؤْمِنِ, however, the heart of the believer, مُسْتَقَرُّ التَّوْحِيد, is a repository of monotheism, where Tawheed is placed. وَالْمَحَبَّةِ, a place that the love of Allah is located. وَالْمَعْرِفَةِ وَالْإِيمَانِ, and knowledge about Allah settles, and faith in Allah settles. وَفِيهِ أَنْوَارُهَا, and the light from those matters, and He settles. فَهُوَ حَقِيقٌ أَن يُحْرَسْ وَيُحْفَظَ مِنْ كَيْدِ الْعَدُوِّ. Therefore it is حَقِيقٌ, it is only rightful, naturally, that it is safeguarded and protected from the plot of the enemy, of the shaitan. فَلَا يَنَالُ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا إِلَّا عَلَى غِرَّةٍ وَغَفْلَةٍ وَخَطْفَةٍ. And it cannot, or shaitan cannot, take anything from the person except in a moment of carelessness or inattention. Except in a moment of carelessness or inattention, where a person is not focused and a person is heedless and not engaged in the dhikr of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. وَقَدْ مُثِلَ ذَلِكَ بِمِثَالٍ حَسَنٍ وَهُوَ ثَلَاثَةُ بُيُوتٍ. And a beautiful example has been presented for this, of 3 houses. The first house, بيت الملك وفيه كنوزه وذخائره وجواهره. The first house is a house that belongs to the king. It contains his treasures, his reserves, and his jewels. وبيت العبد. The second is a house that belongs to the servant. فيه كنوز العبد وذخائره وجواهره وليس فيه جواهر الملك وذخائره. The second is a house that belongs to the servant, and it contains the servant's treasures, his reserves, and his jewels, but it doesn't contain the jewels and the reserves of the king. وبيت خال صفر لا شيء فيه. And the third house is a house that is nothing and contains nothing. فجاء اللص ليسرق من أحد البيوت. And then a thief comes, and it wants to steal out of one of these houses. فَمِنْ أَيِّهَا يَسْرِقْ. Which of these 3 houses will it steal from? The house of the king, the house of the abd, of the servant, or the house where there's no property, it's an abandoned house? Is it going to steal from the abandoned house? Is it going to steal from the king's house? No, why? Because the king's house is fortified and secured and guarded. So it's going to steal from the house of the abd, the house of the servant. فَإِن قُلْتَ, if you said, مِنَ الْبَيْتِ الْخَالِ كَانَ مُحَالًا. If a person was to say, he's going to steal from the empty house. He said, this is impossible. That's impossible. It's improbable. يَانَ الْبَيْتِ الْخَالِ لَيْسَ فِيهِ شَيْءٍ. And we grow up poor. When people say, you don't lock your doors, we say, we don't own nothing. Nothing to steal in this house. Somebody brings something in this house for us to eat, right? A house that don't have nothing. Everything in the house, if you was to drop it off at Goodwill, they wouldn't even take it. They'd just put it right in the dumpster. You don't have anything, right? Everything that you have is dated, it's something that you bought third hand. Nobody wants to steal from that house. Somebody breaks into that house. There's nothing to steal, right? There's nothing to steal. He said, لِأَنَ الْبَيْتَ الْخَالِ لَيْسَ فِيهِ شَيْءٍ يُسْرَقُ. because a house is empty, doesn't have anything to steal. وَلِهَذَا قِيلَ لِابْنِ عَبَّاسٍ. He said, for this reason it was stated to Ibn Abbas, إِنَّ الْيَهُودَ تَزْعُمْ أَنَّهَا لَتُوَسْوَسُ فِي صَلَاتِهَا. That the Jews claim that they don't experience any waswasa, any whisperings during their prayer. Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said, وَمَا يَصْنَعُ الشَّيْطَانِ بِالْقَلْبِ الْخَرَابِ. He said, what is the shaitan going to do with the qalb that is kharab, with an empty house that has no life in it, no property in it, a dilapidated, abandoned house? What is the shaitan going to do with a house that's an abandoned house? He said, with a ruined heart, فَإِن قُلْتَ يَسْرِقُ مِنْ بَيْتِ الْمَلِكِ. And if a person suggested that the thief would steal from the king's house, كَانَ ذَلِكَ كَالْمُسْتَحِيلِ الْمُمْتَنِعِ. He said, then that would be something that is like an utter impossibility. فإن عليه من الحرس واليزك ما لا يستطيع اللص الدنو منه. He said, because the house of the king has guards and fortifications that the thief cannot even come close to penetrating or getting close to. He can't even approach the house of the king. And the outer walls and the guards and so on and so forth. He said, كيف وحارسه الملك بنفسه. He said, how much more if the king himself is the guard? If the king himself is the guard, and the king here being the iman in the heart of a person. وَكَيْفَ يَسْتَطِيعُ اللِّصُّ الدُّنُوَ مِنْهُ وَحَوْلَهُ مِنَ الْحَرَسِ وَالْجُنْدِ مَحَوْنَا. And how can the thief even get close to the house to steal from that house when it is surrounded by guards and surrounded by troops? And those troops are the malaika, the angels. أحسنت. فَلَمْ يَبْقَى لِلِّصِّ إِلَى الْبَيْتُ الثَّالِثِ. So the only place left for the thief is the third house. فَهُوَ الَّذِي يَشُنُّ عَلَيْهِ الْغَارَ, which is the house that he raids, that has the own personal self-interest of the person, that are not connected to Allah in the hereafter. فَلْيَتَأَمَّلَ اللَّبِيبُ هَذَا الْمِثَالِ حَقَّ التَّأَمُّلِ. So let the intelligent and wise person contemplate over this example with proper contemplation. وَلْيُنزِلْهُ عَلَى الْقُلُوبِ فَإِنَّهَا عَلَى مِنْوَالِهِ. And let him apply this to the various types of heart, for verily he will find that the hearts are in like fashion. فَقَلْبٌ خَلَى مِنَ الْخَيْرِ كُلِّهِ وَهُوَ قَلْبُ الْكَافِرِ الْمُنَافِقِ وَالْمُنَافِقِ فَذَلِكَ بَيْتُ الشَّيْطَانِ. A heart that has no good in it whatsoever, which is the heart of the disbeliever or the munafiq, that is the house of the shaitan. قَدْ أَحْرَزَهُ لِنَفْسِهِ وَاسْتَوْطَنَهُ وَاتَّخَذَهُ سَكَنًا وَمُسْتَقَرًّا فَأَيُّ شَيْءٍ يَسْرِقُ مِنْهُ. And the shaitan already lives in his house. What is he going to steal from it? He says, وَفِيهِ خَزَائِنُهُ وَذَخَائِرُهُ وَشُكُوكُهُ وَخِيَالَتُهُ وَوَسَاوِسُهُ. What can he steal from it? There are no treasures or reserves except that they already belong to the shaitan, and the shaitan has already filled the house with doubts and false fantasies, وَوَسَاوِس, and his whisperings. وَقَلْبٌ قَدْ امْتَلَأَ مِنْ جَلَالِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ وَعَظَمَتِهِ. The second heart that is filled with the jalal and the azama of Allah, with the majesty and the greatness of Allah, mighty and majestic, وَمَحَبَّتِهِ وَمُرَاقَبَتِهِ, and love for Allah, and muraqabah of Allah, and a person being mindful of the fact that Allah is watching. وَالْحَيَاءِ مِنْهِ, and being shy of, and a heart that is full of shyness and modesty in front of Allah. فَأَيُّ شَيْطَانٍ يَجْتَرِيُّ عَلَى هَذَا الْقَلْبِ. He said, which shaitan would have the audacity to even attempt to come close to this heart? فَإِنْ أَرَادَ سَرِقَةَ شَيْءٍ مِّنْهُ فَمَاذَا يَسْرِقُ. And if he wants to steal something from it, what is he going to steal? وَغَايَتُهُ أَنْ يَظْفَرَ فِي الْأَحَيِّينَ مِنْهُ بِخَطْفَةٍ وَنَهْبَةٍ تَحْصُلُ لَهُ عَلَى غِرَّةٍ مِنَ الْعَبْدِ وَغَفْلَةٍ لَبُدَّ لَهُ مِنْهَا. He said, and if he snatches something away from this person, then the most that he can do is to snatch something away when the person is unaware, and when a person falls into an inevitable moment of carelessness, inasmuch as that person is human. إِذْ هُوَ بَشَرٌ. Ibn Qayyim says, because a person is human, and he's going to drop his guard from time to time. وَأَحْكَامُ الْبَشَرِيَّةِ جَارِيَةٌ عَلَيْهِ مِنَ الْغَفْلَةِ وَالسَّهْوِ وَالظُّحُولِ وَغَلَبَةِ الطَّبْعِ. And he is susceptible to human nature, of being heedless sometimes and having oversight at other times, and being absent-minded at other times, and having the dominance of his nature from time to time. And when the person therefore falls into sin and disobedience, what does he do? In closing, what does he do? He turns to Allah and he repents. And that causes the shaitan to be remorseful that he even bothered the person to begin with. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to make us from those يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَ, who hear what they hear and follow the best of what they hear. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to help us to retain the points from this book, and we encourage everybody to take a highlighter or take a pencil and mark in the book and have a separate notebook for this book, and to read it in your own free time, and to commit points to memory. To commit points to memory, because this book is the manhaj of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah fi Islah al-Fardi wal Mujtami'. This is the methodology of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah in rectifying the self and the society. And it is all connected to Tawheed and Sunnah. And this book is very manhaji. It is full of all sorts of advices about the manhaj of the Salaf. If you was to say in a word what is it about, it is manhaj al-Salafi tazkiyat al-nafs, the methodology of the Salaf in purifying and developing the self and cleansing the heart. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala for al-huda wa tuqa wal afaf wal ghina. We ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to give us, to guide us, and to give us piety and righteousness, and to make us satisfied with what He has provided for us, and to give us chastity. هذا وصلى اللهم وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.